Ever heard a garden myth so shocking and eerie that makes you go, "This can't be real"? Truth is, your grandparents knew something you don't. Gardens after dark aren't just gardens. They're meeting places for things that don't show up in daylight. While we see tomatoes and corn, they saw doorways, warnings, and spirits, using the rows between vegetables like highways between worlds. These myths lasted long enough to be believed and shaped our grandparents' lives. So, I'm about to show you 16 of these haunted garden myths our grandparents swore were real. And number 5, it explains why tools would vanish overnight and show up moved by morning. Let's see what they were so afraid of. Hearing your name called from the garden at dusk meant don't answer. Remember those times you stood in the kitchen as twilight fell and you thought you heard your name called from the garden? The voice sounded familiar, maybe even exactly like a family member. The temptation to answer, to step outside and see who needed you, was natural. But this was the test. Answering was to accept an invitation from something that wasn't human, no matter how convincingly it mimicked voices you knew. These calls came from entities that couldn't enter homes uninvited, but desperately wanted contact with the living. By responding, by acknowledging the call, you granted them permission, opened a connection that would be difficult to close. Some believed these were spirits of the dead, trying to lure the living into their realm, but the proper response was silence. Ignore the call completely, close the curtains, and move away from the windows that face the garden. If it persisted, some families would light a candle or lantern in the window, a signal that the household was protected. By morning, the calls would stop. Never count your tomatoes. Before harvest, standing in the garden, proudly tallying up the swelling tomatoes on the vine, seemed like harmless anticipation. But this was exactly the behavior that drew the attention of crop-stealing spirits, entities that resented human bounty and delighted in sabotaging carefully tended gardens. These spirits, sometimes called harvest thieves or spitewalkers, listened for signs of pride and abundance. The act of counting was particularly offensive, an announcement to the spirit world that you had plenty, that success was assured. They would descend on the garden that very night. You'd harvest tomatoes that looked perfect but tasted like nothing, their flavor stolen by envious spirits. Or the fruits would split overnight, becoming inedible despite their promising appearance just hours before. Experienced gardeners developed elaborate workarounds. They deliberately undercount, telling neighbors they expected only a modest harvest even when the vines sagged with fruit. This false modesty was protective magic, hiding abundance behind the appearance of scarcity. The spirits, hearing these lowered expectations, would move on to other gardens where prideful counting had painted a target on the crop. Planting rosemary by the gate trapped wandering souls. Rosemary, with its needle-like leaves and powerful scent, was more than a culinary herb. Planted at the garden gate or property entrance, it served as a spiritual trap, catching wandering souls and holding them in an endless loop, unable to enter the garden or move on to their destination. The reasoning combined several folk beliefs. Rosemary was associated with memory and the dead, often planted on graves or carried at funerals. Its strong scent was thought to confuse spirits, overwhelming their ability to sense the living world. A lost soul approaching a garden gate flanked by rosemary would become disoriented, circling the plants indefinitely. Some families viewed this as protective, creating a barrier of trapped spirits that would warn away other supernatural entities. Others saw it as cruel, condemning lost souls to eternal wandering. These families would plant rosemary deep in the garden instead, away from entrances and paths. The plant's protective properties could still be harvested through cuttings, but souls weren't trapped in places where living family members walked daily. A garden spider's web at dawn held messages from the dead spiders themselves, were thought to be neutral creatures, building their webs without an agenda. But spirits, seeking to communicate with the living, would arrange the morning dew on these natural templates, creating letters or symbols that those with the knowledge could read. A web heavy with dew on one side might indicate direction. Certain patterns of droplets formed warning signs about illness, visitors, or changes in fortune. Grandmothers would sometimes stand for minutes studying a single web, interpreting what the night had left behind. The messages weren't always clear, and interpretation varied between families, but the belief was strong enough that people would avoid breaking garden webs in the morning, waiting until afternoon when the dew had dried and any supernatural communication had faded. Children were taught to watch for these webs, but never to touch them before the sun fully rose, lest they disturb a message meant for someone else, drawing unwanted spiritual attention to themselves. Up next, the awaited number 5. Garden tools left out. Overnight, attracted spirits. A hoe leaning against the fence, pruning shears on the bench. A bucket left where it fell. Our grandparents believed these forgotten tools became borrowing opportunities for restless souls who missed the physical world and the simple satisfaction of work. By morning, tools might be found moved, arranged differently, or showing signs of use by hands that cast no shadow. The belief wasn't that spirits damaged tools maliciously, but that they genuinely used them, driven by muscle memory and the desire to tend gardens as they had in life. A tool moved from one side of the garden to another, soil freshly turned in a spot that was bare the night before, or plants pruned in the darkness using techniques specific to the family. These were signs that someone was still caring for the garden, someone who no longer needed daylight to work. The solution was simple: bring all tools inside every evening. This broke the connection, removing the physical objects through which spirits could interact with the garden. Never dig where lightning struck. Grandpa believed that a lightning strike left more than a scar on the earth. It created a doorway, a permanent weak spot in the boundary between the living world and whatever lay beyond. Digging in these spots was forbidden, an invitation to forces that should remain separated from human activity. Some said it was burnt not just physically, but spiritually, marked by celestial fire that opened a channel between heaven, earth, and the underworld. Others believed lightning was attracted to existing thin spots, striking where the barrier was already weak, and digging there would tear the opening wider. Whatever grew in these spots would be strange: plants with unusual colors, odd flavors, growth patterns that defied explanation. Animals would avoid these areas instinctively. Smart gardeners would mark the locations of lightning strikes and plan their gardens accordingly, sometimes planting nothing, and sometimes using them only for flowers or herbs rather than food crops. The witch's garden, mark finding weeds arranged in a perfect circle, sent chills through any gardener who knew the old ways. A circle of weeds, especially if they appeared overnight, meant a witch had walked your property and marked it. These circles served as territorial markers in the supernatural world, claiming the land and everything that grew on it for darker purposes. Crops within the circle would belong to the witch, their vitality drained to feed her magic. Some believed the circles were gathering spots where witches would return on certain nights to harvest the life force from the soil itself. Others held that these marks attracted malevolent spirits, creating weak spots in the barrier between the physical and spiritual realms. The response varied by family tradition. Some would dig up the entire circle, salt the earth, and replant with protective herbs. Others would create a countermark, planting iron nails at cardinal points around the circle to break its power. But everyone agreed, a witch's circle could not be ignored. While some myths were based on unsuspecting invaders like weeds, others worked through plants that should never have been brought close to human habitation. This brings us to the next myth: Hemlocks, planting hemlock. Anywhere near your home invites the reaper. Hemlock, recognizable by its purple spotted stems and white flower clusters, was death's own plant. and bringing it close to where people lived was inviting death himself to visit. This wasn't metaphorical. Families believed the reaper walked where hemlock grew, and planting it near your home gave him a reason to linger. The plant's extreme toxicity was well known. Hemlock had killed Socrates and countless others throughout history. But the spiritual danger extended beyond accidental poisoning. Hemlock was thought to mark the boundary between life and death, growing naturally in places where that boundary was thin: graveyards, execution sites, battlefields. Our grandparents believed that deliberately planting it near your home blurred that boundary, suggesting that death was welcome in the household. Some felt the plant itself called to death, its growth releasing vapors that attracted dark forces. Others held that death, walking his eternal rounds, would notice hemlock near a home and stop to investigate. And once his attention was drawn to a household, tragedy would follow. If potatoes rotted in storage, someone had cursed the harvest. Our grandparents believed that finding potatoes turning black and soft in the root cellar, despite proper storage conditions, pointed to something darker than natural decay. This was hexed produce, deliberately cursed by someone who wished the family harm. The implications extended beyond lost food. A cursed harvest signaled that the family had enemies willing to work through supernatural channels. The curse was thought to be placed either at planting time, with the ill-wisher walking through the field speaking ill words over the seed potatoes, or at harvest through handling of the crop by someone bearing malicious intent. Some believed a witch could curse an entire harvest simply by looking at it with envy, her jealous gaze imparting rot that would only manifest later in storage. The response had to be immediate and thorough. The cursed potatoes couldn't be fed to animals or composted near the garden. They had to be buried far from cultivated land or burned. The storage area needed to be cleansed with salt, iron, or blessed water. Planting garlic upside down opened portals to hell. Garlic, properly planted with the pointy end up, was protective magic that kept evil at bay. But plant it upside down with the root end skyward and you'd reverse its power, creating an opening through which dark forces could enter the world. The reasoning was symbolic, but taken with deadly seriousness. Garlic, growing the correct way, pushed down into the earth, anchoring itself against darkness below, while its green shoots reached toward light. Reversed, it pulled upward from below while pushing down from above, creating a contradictory flow of energy that tore holes in the natural order. These portals didn't manifest as visible openings, but as areas of wrongness, spots where plants refused to grow, where animals wouldn't tread, where the air felt heavy and wrong. Families who discovered upside-down garlic would dig it up immediately, salt the spot heavily, and avoid planting there for at least a full year. Some would call in a priest or other spiritual authority to bless the ground and close whatever opening might have begun. A dead bird in the garden meant someone had sent dark magic. Finding a dead bird among the vegetables wasn't a simple misfortune. The placement mattered. Not just a bird that happened to die nearby, but one positioned deliberately, often in the center of a bed or at a crossing of garden paths. This was sacrifice magic, an intentional act meant to harm the garden and, by extension, the family that depended on it. The bird served as a vessel, carrying the sender's harmful intent into the heart of the garden. As it decayed, that malevolence would seep into the soil, poisoning crops and creating ongoing problems. The bird itself might show signs of ritual killing, arranged in unnatural positions, marked with symbols or surrounded by items like nails, needles, or burnt herbs. Our grandparents responded with spiritual cleansing. The bird had to be removed without touching it directly, often using tools that would later be destroyed or buried far from the property. The spot where it lay needed purification with salt, vinegar, or fire. Mint growing wild meant ghosts were feeding. Mint's aggressive spread was well known to any gardener, but when it appeared in areas where none had been planted, growing thick and healthy in spots where other plants struggled. The explanation went beyond mere invasiveness. These wild patches marked the paths where spirits walked most frequently, feeding on the mint's energy or using it to maintain a connection to the physical world. The belief held that certain spirits, particularly those of people who had loved gardens in life, would return to places they'd tended. Unable to interact with most plants, they found mint responsive to supernatural touch. The herb's vigorous growth reflected the attention these spirits paid to it, their presence somehow nourishing the plants in ways living gardeners couldn't replicate. The mint itself was considered safe to harvest and use, unlike plants believed to be cursed or tainted. Some grandparents took comfort in these mint patches, viewing them as signs that deceased loved ones still watched over the property. If your lettuce bolted early, death was rushing toward you. Lettuce bolting before its time, shooting up a seed stalk when the head should still be forming, was more than agricultural disappointment. Plants, being closer to the earth and the cycles of life, could sense approaching death and would rush to complete their life cycle before that darkness arrived. The warning wasn't always about the gardener themselves. It might signal death coming for someone in the household, a neighbor, or even someone connected to the family but living elsewhere. The plants felt the approaching shadow and responded with biological urgency, prioritizing reproduction over growth, seeds over food. Experienced families would note which beds bolted early and watch for other signs. Illness in the household, accidents waiting to happen, or word from distant relatives that something had gone wrong. Some would take action, performing protective rituals or being extra cautious in daily activities. Others accepted the prophecy fatalistically, seeing the bolted lettuce as confirmation of a death they'd already sensed was coming. Owls watching from a tree meant death in the family. The specific nature of the owl's hooting mattered. A single call was a warning, multiple hoots were certainty, and an owl that remained visible while calling was practically a death sentence. Owls occupied a strange position in folk belief, neither fully natural nor entirely supernatural. Their nocturnal habits, silent flight, and eerie calls made them seem like creatures from the boundary between worlds. When one took position near a home, focusing its attention on the human inhabitants, it was performing its duty as Death's scout, marking the household for a coming visit. The family member most at risk was often thought to be whoever the owl looked at directly, though some believed it was whoever heard the hoot first or most clearly. Responses varied. Some families would try to scare the owl away through noise or thrown objects, hoping to break the death omen. Others viewed this as pointless. Death's messenger couldn't be deterred by human interference. A few families believed that feeding the owl might appease it, offering meat in hopes that the bird would take the offering and move on. Couldn't perceive. A white butterfly over the garden. Was a soul passing through? Seeing a white butterfly fluttering through the vegetable rows demanded respect and stillness. This wasn't an ordinary insect. To our grandparents, it was a human soul in transition, temporarily taking wing as it traveled from one realm to another. To disturb it was to risk trapping the soul or altering its journey in ways that would cause suffering. The belief held that souls, particularly those of the recently deceased or those being born, sometimes took the form of white butterflies during their travels. These appearances were most common at dawn or dusk. A butterfly that landed on a person was thought to be a deceased loved one saying goodbye, or a new soul acknowledging someone who would be important in its coming life. Children were taught to stand perfectly still when a white butterfly approached, letting it complete its investigation before moving on, while some families maintained complete silence, believing that human speech might confuse the soul or bind it to earth when it should be moving freely. If you smell flowers, with no source, a spirit is near working in the garden on a still day, you might suddenly catch the scent of roses, lilacs, or some other flower blooming intensely nearby. But looking around, you'd find nothing in bloom, no plant that could produce such a strong fragrance. This phantom scent was a calling card, a spirit making its presence known through the one sense it could still manipulate. The smell was almost always pleasant, recognizable as a specific flower, and stronger than natural blooms would produce. Some believed these were deceased family members, returning to spaces they'd loved in life and announcing themselves through the flowers they'd tended. Others thought they were older spirits, inhabitants of the land from before it was cultivated, using flower scent as a gentle way to remind the living that they weren't alone. The scent never lasted long, usually fading within moments, as if the effort of producing it was exhausting for whatever created it. But in those brief moments of phantom fragrance, the garden became a meeting place, proof that death didn't end all connections to the places and people souls had loved. These 16 myths reveal a worldview where gardens were never entirely safe, never fully under human control. Were they right to fear? Which of these myths resonates with you? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to leave this video a hype and subscribe to this channel. See you on the next video.